Hello, everyone. My name's Rich Mogull. I am the Chief Analyst here at the Cloud Security Alliance, and joining me today is Hem Pant. Hem, thank you very much for joining us for this session on the best practices for modern cloud architecture. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So the way we've got this set up is we've done a little bit of prep work. We've gone over some of the issues that we know people are concerned about these days. And we're going to run through the questions and just kind of have an open discussion about each of these. So, Hem, one of the things that really struck me is even though I've only been on staff for the Cloud Security Alliance for a little while, I was involved with the CSA right at the start. And I will never forget, I still remember sitting there at the RSA conference and talking about cloud. And there was a financial services person in the room who goes, "We're never going to use cloud." Well, I think that's changed. So, what has changed in your position? Because I think every major financial service and even all the smaller ones are using cloud to some degree this day. Was it a change in risk tolerance? Was it a change in the technology? What has allowed us to do this?
Hey, Rich. First thing, thank you for inviting me for this session. Good to see you. To answer this shortly, I think it was from a cloud perspective, it was a combination of what the regulators wanted, what the firms wanted, and what the customers wanted, right? So I think the biggest change which I have seen is the regulatory clarity about things, like what can it be done. And I think the most important aspect is the cloud. From a cloud perspective, this has started helping in things of resilience. So with the Dura coming on in the European side and operational resilience in the UK, the cloud providers have started selling the resilience story, right? So which resonates very well with the regulators, which resonates very well with all the financial institutions, and you can actually demonstrate that you can be resilient to various degrees on having a proper architecture set up in the cloud. So it helps in shifting the risk tolerances when you start using the cloud.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And to kind of add on to that, when I first started getting involved in cloud, early days of when the CSA started, I would not say that resilience was there. And to be blunt, I don't think the security controls that we needed in financial services was there. The time period I'm talking about, identity and access management in AWS didn't exist. Azure didn't exist. GCP didn't exist. The nature of the technologies. And personally, I've seen two things. One that aligns with yours, and I think it's sort of compatible, is the cloud service providers keep adding on services that are needed for financials to be able to operate in the cloud, KMS and cloud HSMs, and then getting KMS, for example, to be as good as a cloud HSM or backed by an HSM. Azure Key Vault similar, and they also call it KMS over in Google. Makes it easy. So adding of those technology elements that can be those building blocks for financial services, and then the resiliency piece. And I want to come back to resiliency because there's an interesting thing there, and we even have a slide later on about
Oh,
that, because as you said, we have the ability to architect resilient. I'm not sure everybody does yet. Anything else on this, or should we go on? But I want to put a pin on that resiliency one.
definitely, I think resiliency is one of the aspect, but also the other aspect is like as firms have moved more onto the internet, right, and they become more digital, some of the solutions which they need to use for protecting themselves, like be it scrubbing services for DDoS prevention of a
Mhm.
DDoS attack, or for a anti-fraud capability. These this is where the true value of a cloud service provider comes in because it sits above all of your architecture, right? So
Mhm.
and that's the beauty, and that's where it again ties back to the resilience pieces of it, right? Like you're able to demonstrate to the regulators and to your clients the value you're providing to them, and especially now with AI just growing in thick and fast, it just really helps to be on the cloud and use some of those cloud services.
So, that actually dovetails nicely into our next question, which is around risk. And, if we think back to those early days, it was things like everything is managed by the root account in AWS, or, all the whole fundamental nature of each of the platforms obviously is a little different. I tend to build more myself in AWS, so I try not to be biased. That's just where those examples will tend to come from. the risk profile has changed, and it's changed pretty significantly. And obviously, there's a wide range of cloud services, not just the infrastructure as a service. What do you think and again, specific for financial services as we've used it differently and put real production workloads up there? What are the risks that concern you the most? I mean, you were recently out of being a CISO for a major financial and was obviously having to deal with these on a daily basis.
Indeed, right. So I think the two, things which are quite important from the aspect, there are multiple risks which you have to think about, but the two things which I would talk about is the non-human identity, right? So a lot of these clouds use multiple identities. Most of the issues which we have seen with clouds are related to a misconfiguration or a misuse of an identity, right? So how do you deal with that non-human identity sprawl, and how do you manage that kind of access? And the second thing is definitely the concentration risk. We have seen multiple events which have happened where one of the cloud provider has gone down. You have multiple services on a particular cloud provider and they all go down. So how do you deal with that aspect of it? So you need to deal with that concentration risk also. And in some ways, the architecture could help it. But again, this is where the cloud providers themselves are learning on how to deal with that concentration risk by having the different regions defined. But also, it's leading to the use of a multi-cloud strategy, right? Depending on each firm, what kind of services they want and for how they're supporting the businesses. And it depends on the business where they have a specific product. It could be on a Google Cloud, it could be on an Amazon Cloud, it could be on an Ali Cloud, right? So it depends on how you use it. So I think those two definitely are some of the biggest challenges which I have seen from a cloud perspective. And I think everyone needs to kind of have a review of these two aspects.
Yeah, and so I may just derail this whole talk and keep us on this
Yeah, sure.
on this one because you just brought up two huge issues, and I want to hone in on. We'll do the identity first, and then concentration risk on the second. And
Yep.
obviously, with Dora and then this too, there's a lot of more discussion about concentration risk, particularly in the European market. Going back to identities and the NHIs, the non-human identities, obviously that's becoming a growing issue due to AI uh, and agentic, as well as just non-human identities are quite problematic. But before we talk about the NHI part, let's talk about the human identity part as well. Like one of the things that's really struck me last year, I did a lot of last 2 years. I've done a lot of like threat research, and a big major source of breaches. It's a developer or an administrator getting compromised on their laptop or desktop, and
Yep.
then that being all the credentials being pulled by an info stealer, which are now getting smart enough. They're not just looking for usernames, passwords, access keys, and secret keys. They're pulling tokens.
Yeah.
So for token theft and token abuse, because those aren't necessarily bound to that hardware. Do you think which do you feel is harder for us to deal with? Is it the non-human identities, which obviously then we have to deal with scope and how do you do your attestations and everything, or do you think a year from now it's still just going to be the users getting hit with info stealer malware?
It's a very good question, Rich. And I think the answer is it's both of them. You need to look at both of them. Like you need to balance it out, right? You need to look at your administrators who are actually having the keys to the kingdom. So you need to make sure that you're rolling out just-in-time access for them. You're logging what is happening. You're ensuring those are being reviewed, and putting in controls like just-in-time access actually reduces the risk significantly, right? You also need to look at other aspects like zero trust environment. So how are you architecting your environment? Uh, if someone gets access to a particular environment, can they access everything, or they get specific access to a specific server or to a specific business application? So from that aspect, a combination of these two will help a lot in mitigating it. It's not a foolproof thing that nothing will go wrong. Things
Mm-hmm.
always go wrong, right? So, but what it does is it makes reduces your risk significantly, right? So it makes it much more difficult for a malicious actor to target an organization which is starting to implement these layered controls. So from that aspect, this is important. And as the use of agentic AI becomes more common, we'll have those non-human identities, right? We are seeing more and more communications happening between systems, between APIs, and not humans altogether. So you need to understand what's happening in your environment. You need to do that baselining. You need to understand what is being used. And then, like, one of the, I've just been studying myself, been doing a course from Google on agentic AIs. And one of the things which they clearly call out is that exactly that aspect where machines are communicating more than the humans are doing now. So, yeah, I think so. It has to be a balance between those two.
I love that you mentioned JIT, just in time. In particular, so I was with a startup with a vendor a little bit ago, and we built JIT originally for ourselves. So it was for specifically for cloud access. I think we were only using it on AWS, and we actually released that as a feature. None of the customers used it. None. It was a super effective. It worked over Slack or Teams, and you could just get your permissions just in time, and you could have M of N authorizations, so you could require a pool of approvers if it was more sensitive. To me, that's the best defense. And this was and when I was over at Firemon, and our CEO is my co-founder when we were kind of developing this, I loved how he phrased it. When we try to do least privilege is the least privileges somebody may ever need. So that's a pretty wide set of privileges. With just in time, it's only the privileges they need for
For
that
that
act.
activity.
Yeah. I thought that was
Exactly.
a wonderful way to frame it. All right. We do want to talk about concentration risk, but I want to and multi-cloud, but I think I'm gonna nudge us forward and we'll
Sure.
come back to that. Anything on the threat environment that's changed? And again, specific for financial services, obviously everybody's worried about deepfakes and everything for consumers. All right, is there anything in terms of financial services and cloud that you think is worth highlighting that's kind of changed within the last year since our last financial services summit?
I think one of the aspects which I've definitely seen change in the financial environment is AI powered social engineering. So social engineering has become much more smarter, right? Like if they want to target you, they can get you. Here in UK and European side, we have been very lucky that we have had some tests like the CBEST, which is a kind of a red teaming exercises, and there's a TIBA exercise, which actually lets firm test their own environment by carrying out a red team exercise jointly with the regulator, right? So that has highlighted some of the things where you can actually use AI for creating such good social engineering attacks, right? So when you do from a red team exercises, it gives you a good idea of how it can be used. And we are definitely like I've seen cases, I've been hearing a lot of things where now AI is being used to carry out these attacks, right? So how that can be used. And I think there's another very important aspect to link to this. It's not just about targeting the financial firm directly. It's can I enter your environment using your third parties?
Mm-hmm.
So the third party governance becomes a very important piece. And cloud service providers also become a very important aspect of it because if you actually target a cloud service provider, suddenly you have access to all these financial services themselves. So it's seeing that kind of change, but it's happening slowly and steadily, but definitely being misused.
Yeah, the ones that, again, to build on what you just said with talking with CSA members in your position, one of the other related aspects of the social engineering is the fake employee. Basically, it's almost an epidemic of, and we think it's largely North Korea, but there's other threat operators, adversaries out there who are, because again, if you're in a large, I mean, you do vet your employees, but the amount of hiring and firing occurring in a major financial services organization on a daily basis and them coming in that way. So I know that one, it was a huge topic of discussion among some of the members that I talk with. Another one that has been coming up that I don't think we've really fully even reflected in all of our reports is around like Auth token theft for and fake application registrations. So we've seen that, which is more of a direct for software as a service as well as for some of the platform as a service and creating those fake applications. That's come up. But the one you didn't mention that surprised me a little bit is software supply chain risk. And that one, with particularly what we've seen with NPM and all the backdooring, and again, it's a little different. It's not cloud specific necessarily, like the other two kind of aren't either social engineering, even either, other than it's a way to get into the cloud. But that software supply chain issues and backdooring and the attacks that we've seen with the NPM base in particular. That's just the most recent one. I know that's been keeping some people up at night.
No, and that's what I would say. That's what I was referring to, the third party governance piece of it, where
Okay.
where you get codes from any of your third parties, right? Like how do you trust it? Like one of the biggest example is like Microsoft releases a lot of patch. So we have seen incidents where one of the big providers released a patch. It nearly brought the entire industry down, right? So like, do you need to roll out the patches immediately? Do you like have a canary in the mine? Kind of an approach. So that's those are the kinds of things which you need to start looking at. It's just not for cloud, but just all of your
Yep.
infrastructure.
So let's go more into the architecture, which is actually the last word you said, and also the title of this talk. How do you think your use of cloud architectures has changed and impacted security? For example, have you been, when you were in your operational role, was it more like were you moving into serverless and containers, or was it lift and shift, or were you taking advantage of new cloud architectural options, or maybe even, SaaS? Just trying to get a sense of, if you think about the long timeline now of, almost 10 years, 15 years, or more of being in cloud, what has changed from how you approach your cloud deployments and architectures?
I think one of the biggest changes in terms of the cloud architecture which we had introduced, and this is just with the various firms I've worked with, is the way cloud architecture can be used to support your resiliency, right? So different using different regions and
Hmm.
teaching your developers that you can actually you know construct your application in such a way that they're spread across multiple zones, so it helps in that operational resiliency aspect of it. So I think that's one of the key aspects which we have introduced. Definitely seen more move towards containers and serverless side of technology, because it helps you in providing much more better and relevant changes, reducing the blast radius of a particular change. So from that aspect, I think it really helps. And then for each of those containers, you can be quite event driven. So like how you're looking at that
Hmm.
vulnerability for that particular container rather than the whole application stock. So you're making it into much more manageable chunks. So I think cloud provides that ability to do that. And then having the capability that, especially when you're using serverless architecture and containers, when you need to really troubleshoot your applications, it helps in that resiliency aspect. You can only bring down one specific aspect of that whole application rather than bringing down the entire application in the past. So that's one of the key benefits uh, from using this new kind of an architecture.
Now, one of the things that I've encountered a lot is, and this is just from dialogues, and I'm helping members kind of figure out how to solve various problems in their deployments. I'll be honest, like it's not a large percentage that is leveraging some of the newer architectural capabilities. I'm still seeing a lot of lift and shift. In your experience, like what percentage, and I'm going to just ask you to aggregate the last three places you worked. um, what percentage do you think of applications were adopting some of the newer approaches versus lift and shift?
So I think, as you rightly pointed out, in the past it was about lift and shift, but now as the regulators have come out with the concept of operational resilience and Dura coming in,
Hmm.
that's helped in changing the way people think about it, right? So from that aspect, we are able to have a discussion with the business. We are able to have a discussion with our technology teams and say the architecture needs to change. So when you're having a discussions with them about how their application is architected, you are able to ask them and challenge them, and look into aspects of one of the important aspects, for example, from Dura, which talks about exit requirements, right? So
Yep.
if you have a particular cloud provider and you had to exit from it, how are you going to deal with it? Have you thought about it? What are the kinds of implications of it? So I think the regulations have helped in that perspective. Definitely, you're very right that there were there was a shift in that mindset. It was initially lift and shift, but now it's changing as people understand what are the regulatory requirements, and that's helped in moving more applications toward this newer kind of an architecture, which is looking at different regions so that the application does not fail from a global perspective. You can still service specific regions, and we are seeing regulators requiring localization from that aspect, which says that for my users in my particular region, I want the application to be running. So I think that's where we are seeing that shift in the architecture.
So now, in terms of that covers our architectural stuff. But what about cloud security operations? And the changes there. And for me, I've seen more cloud detection and response. I've seen better operationalization of CSPM and CNAP, better ability to use it. Not perfect, but better, definitely. Anything you've seen along those lines, or other different technologies?
I think one of the important things which I've started to observe already is in terms of how the traditional security operation centers used to operate. Now with the cloud service provider, it's like, and especially with the use of agentic AIs, that's changing heavily,
Yeah.
right? In the past, it was, and if you look at the history of the amount of events which have happened, every organization has a SOC which receives hundreds or millions of events. But how do you find that one particular event which you need to be bothered about? And I think this is where the true value of agentic AI will start coming in, and we'll see, the upliftment of the SOC analyst from being the people who are trying to understand and correlate using agentic AI based tools to understand what's happening and then take a much more informed decision of things and actions which they can use to save and particularly safeguard a particular organization.
Yeah. I would also say, like, operationally, I've been seeing, some of the things that we've pushed in larger organizations around cloud center of excellence and cloud teams and dedicated people to cloud. That's starting to get into more of the mid and the smaller organizations that perhaps didn't have that. And again, focusing specifically on security, I know it's still a struggle. I had a call this week with a member who is organization who was trying to figure out, like, they didn't have people dedicated to cloud, but they were moving into cloud, and that was a big part of the discussion, was telling them, like, how to pull people out, how to adjust operations, and do that in a way that wasn't going to break what you were doing. And I'm not going to say larger organizations are always necessarily always better than at that, but they have the resources to hire cloud people in a way that the smaller ones have not historically had.
Yeah, and I think definitely putting in those guardrails. So yes, like for a smaller organization, it will be better to use the native capability of it. But for a larger organization to understand and to demonstrate also to the regulators that they have taken specific steps, right? So for example, a particular build, if you're doing infrastructure as a code, what are the kind of guardrails you want? What are the kinds of
Yep.
events which need to be logged? What are the kinds of identity you want to be created? What kind of API access? So there are multiple things which you need to look at and define in your guardrails. And I think depending on how, I think infrastructure as a code is fascinating, right? Like how it's changed the whole world in terms of how quickly you can virtualize systems and roll them out,
Yep.
and especially for developers, that's changed the whole world completely. So, but from a security perspective, that also brings in the aspect of how do you safeguard those images? How do you safeguard those systems? It's like all become perimeterless, right? So you have to have those guardrails in places.
Not this year, but the year before, myself and Chris Ferris, who's a collaborator who does some stuff with me, we gave a presentation on security and variance at Amazon reInvent, and it was a technical talk. Service control policies, resource control policies, declarative policies, which Azure just calls them policies, Google just calls them policies, makes it easier. But I mean, that went over really well, and I think that ties in nice. It's the putting those walls in place that can't be circumvented, that you don't have to manage 1,000 exceptions. They're just there. And I do think I'm seeing more appetite for those, as well as the data perimeter concepts as well, and trying to implement those, which leverages these kinds of policies to really operationalize cloud and cloud security in a way, honestly, I think is going to be better than what we have in our data centers. So we've already talked a bunch about resiliency. I just want to cover this quickly because we are getting short on time here. And all right, I'm just going to put it out there. Is multi-cloud the answer for resiliency, or is it, like you said, multiple regions? Because going true multi-cloud is just honestly too expensive for a given application?
So I think it would depend on the risk appetite of the particular organization, whether they go for a multi-cloud strategy or a multi-region strategy, right? So depending on uh, what particular kind of business services a particular organization provides, they need to take that call whether they want to use that multi-cloud strategy, or you can be specifically using one provider, but how are you making sure you're architecting your application in a right way for resilience? So I think that needs to change. It will depend from firm to firm.
Yeah, my experience, multi-cloud for a single application is often incredibly expensive, but if you want to run different
Exactly.
applications on different clouds, which brings us to sovereign cloud, and breaking that out. Do you think regions are sufficient, or do we really need more sovereign clouds?
So I think with the current geopolitical situation and digital nationalism, I think it is going to become a reality that you will have sovereign cloud. You will have the requirement for sovereign cloud, and I'm definitely starting to like. I started hearing about tech localization way back from 2018, 2019, where we had some of these regulators saying, "How do you manage the, like if you look at GDPR as an example, from there it started, but now we are seeing more and more of it where regulators and particular regions want the technology. It's no more about, oh, it's on the cloud, you do not know where it is. Regulators want you to understand that the data needs to be in some data center in your region. So
Yep.
that is becoming a reality, right? And that's going to make it very interesting. So some of the cloud providers have started moving towards this aspect of sovereignty by design, where they only have servers which specifically provide services to that particular region. And I think even the regulators understand that certain key payment related files, personal files can be kept over there, but like generalized operational files, like for example, from a SOC perspective, they can be used in a centralized mechanism.
Yeah, and I think some of the one of the advantages, the true sovereign clouds, it actually separates the control plane into different regions, which you wouldn't normally get with regional, where there's shared control plane. So it can actually help with resiliency. I want to thank you for your time. We covered a whole lot of topics. Our audience doesn't know there were multiple technical issues. Your computer crashed, my computer crashed as we were recording this. It was a little bit of a curse talk, but thanks. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
The key piece I would leave our audience with is make sure that you audit your service accounts. Before you start worrying about the AI models and other things, just look at your service accounts, right? I think that's where you would get the most bang for the buck.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time. And thanks everybody for joining us for the summit. And we hope you enjoy the rest of our talks.
Thank you so much, Rich. Take care. See you all, everyone.